Welcome to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to release and reception. Is it a season? What is this? Chris, is it a cycle, a theme?
I think it's whatever you want to call it. I've been using the word cycle in my conversations with myself.
Yeah, I think cycle works.
Yeah, it's like we're doing a little rundown. We wanted to kind of collect our episodes in a more kind of film trace style fashion. We wanted to be a little more organized, and as I think you've put out on Twitter, a little wonkier.
Yes.
So we are diving in. We're not just tracing individual films each episode. Throughout this batch of episodes, we are tracing the evolution of self-aware horror. And this was kind of your baby concept.
No. You're going to put me on the spot, aren't
putting you on the spot, Dan, to kind of help us figure out where we are in the 2010s, late 2000s, early 2010s with self-aware horror, because that's the focus of today's episode.
Before I do that, let's get Evan in here.
Oh gosh, we have a guest. God damn it.
Guest Evan from Spoilerpiece Theatre podcast, which is an awesome podcast based out of Boston. Evan, say hello, and I don't know, what you guys cover recently? Sundance, probably?
Oh, shucks. Hey, everybody, I'm Evan Crean. I co-host Spoilerpiece Theatre. Most recent episode was Sundance. I'm trying to think what else we've talked about recently. We talked about Belle, Eternals.
You guys did top 10 films of 2021. I listened a little bit of that. What was your number one?
My number one was Language Lessons. Did you guys see that one?
I've not seen that.
No, I wanted to.
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, it's really good. It's written and directed by Natalie Morales, who actually had 2 movies come out last year that she wrote and directed.
Is it Plan B was the other one?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. And this one's supposed to be better than that. Yeah.
Yeah, I liked Language Lessons better. I did like both. But yeah, this one's about it was shot during COVID, and so it's about 2 people connecting over Zoom and FaceTime over taking Spanish lessons.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah. A COVID film hit your number one. That's amazing. That's awesome. So how do we even start this, Evan? I don't know. I guess the spotlight's on me, right?
Yes.
I have to answer. Okay, so the start of this was definitely Scream 5 coming out. So
it's just called Scream, Dan.
God, don't even start with me.
That annoys me too.
We'll have to dive in that film because that will be part of this cycle. When that came out, I sort of was thinking about, we were thinking about themes and sort of collecting films together. Horror's always been my favorite genre. And with the new Scream coming out, it felt like a dive into sort of another layer of postmodernism. And I did see it, and thinking about it a lot more, it feels like self-aware horror is in a very strange place right now. Mm-hmm. I think it really did kick off with Scream in 1996. One of the better postmodern horror films ever made. It's been going for over 25 years now, and sort of pops up here and there in horror films. Kind of became the lingual, like how we see horror is through a postmodern lens at this point. So I kind of want to check in and see, 1, how it evolved, and 2, see where it has taken us with Scream 2022. Is that the official title? Is that how I say it? Scream 2022?
We can call it Scream 5 because fuck it.
Scream 5, which, by the way, it's already so successful that Scream 6 got greenlit today. So it's... it's definitely a home run, but I really wanted to dive into this, I guess you call it subgenre of horror, but it's so pervasive and has been since Scream that it's just become, it's the primary lens through which horror is experienced, which is postmodernism or self-aware horror. I don't know. How does that take sound for you, Chris? I mean, does that sound like a good starting point?
Absolutely. I think we struggled a bit with whether to really kind of focus on the term postmodern versus self-aware, which is maybe a little more.
I like postmodern. Why didn't you not want to use postmodernism?
I get concerned with the academia of it all, because while I think there's absolutely arguments to be made that the movies we're covering on this batch of episodes, this cycle of Film Trace, have postmodern elements. There's a lot of people that are persnickety about that definition. I don't know. For instance, if a lot of the horror movies that we see nowadays really fit into what was happening in the 90s when the original Scream came out.
Oh, true. Okay.
As well as in other genres like Pulp Fiction in 94 with regards to crime and noir, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, that's open for conversation. I think that's one of the fun things about this is we kind of get to get messy a little bit. What's your take, Evan? Because you actually covered the central film we're focusing on today, Cabin in the Woods, back when it was released in 2012.
So I'm old.
Let's take us back. We're old too, man.
Yeah,
what was your experience kind of experiencing that movie for the first time, and then you also had a chance to visit an interview with two of the stars, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I love that you guys picked this as a theme for this season of the show. I've always been a big fan of horror. I've been a big fan of horror comedy. I love self-aware horror movies. I love talking about postmodernism. This is like just ticking a lot of boxes for me. Yeah, I would agree that Scream really is a turning point for the genre in terms of kind of taking shape of what we've seen, today. I mean, I think there's plenty of self-aware horror movies, from earlier on, even, Sam Raimi and the Evil Dead films, I feel like are a really good example of being kind of like self-aware and using pastiche and really just kind of playing with a lot of different genres. But yeah, I when I saw Cabin in the Woods, I really enjoyed it. I mean, I went in with very low expectations, and I was just pleasantly surprised to watch a horror movie that was, I thought at the time and still think now, very self-aware, paying homage to the genre while kind of playing within its rules. And then for me anyway, I think it's just a good horror movie too. Like, I think it works as a horror movie. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that it just it plays the gore and the kills and things like that very straight. Like the rest of the movie, there's a lot of jokes, but when it comes to like the actual killing and the violence, it plays it pretty straight. And for me, that's why I think it works. But yeah, I mean, it was a fun movie to see at the time. I really dug it. I was definitely on the same wavelength. And yeah, I had a lot of fun talking with Fran Kranz and Kristen Connolly about the movie. It seemed like they, were really plugged into what the film was trying to do, and the tone. They both, had a blast working on it. And also, I think, well, I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but it also had like a weird ride in terms of like being made and then sitting on the shelf for a few years before it finally came out.
Yeah, I mean, it was shot technically in 2009, and then the original release was MGM 2010 February. And I can't really I don't know if you guys have more information about the financial difficulties that they had. Did they like run out of money? Did they go bankrupt? I don't remember.
Yeah. The MGM went bankrupt at the time, and so this and a few other movies I think sat on the shelf. This and the new Red Dawn, which also starred Chris Hemsworth.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
Yeah, those sat on the shelf for a few years until, was it who bailed them out? Was it Lionsgate?
Lionsgate, yeah. Lionsgate bought this in, I think, April or July 2011. And then they played it at, what was that thing? God, it was something. It's some like film festival in Austin.
Oh, yeah. Southwest.
Yeah, something. Yeah, it was one of those.
It was the Dumb Butt-a-thon first, which
was that Ain't It Cool? Ain't It Cool News?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And then South by picked it up, and that's where all the national buzz started taking off for sure.
Well, that might be a good place to start here because I mean, you saw it when it came out. You saw it like right in theaters, like in probably 2012.
Yeah.
Chris, when did you see this?
I think I didn't see it until the DVD release. I believe it was a Redbox rental for me.
Good old Redbox. $1 DVDs, nice. Can't beat it.
Absolutely. How about you, Dan?
I avoided this film. I followed. I was huge into Ain't It Cool News, all that kind of stuff. I knew all about the buzz. I knew about the production stuff back when it was happening. And I just, for whatever reason, I was like, yeah, I don't want to see this. Which is, I don't know why. I can't really pinpoint why I wasn't into it. It just seemed like one of those films that was just like very cool and hip, but like maybe I was too much of a curmudgeon to see it. So I avoided it till about 3 years ago. I went camping with a friend, and she's like, well, we should watch this movie because you've never seen it. So I saw it in 2019 for the first time. And yeah, it probably hits very different than it did back in 2012 or some people 2011. Yeah, it's we've had a lot has happened in the horror genre since then. And I think, I'm going to throw this out there, a tough question right now. And I think, Evan, you already answered it from your side.
Oh boy.
Would you say that this is a horror movie first or comedy movie first? Evan, I'll let you what do you think? Yeah, it sounds like you want to say it's a horror movie, right?
Yeah, that's where I would say.
Oh man. Okay. So yeah, because I think I'm more on the side of it being a comedy first and foremost.
I think I agree with you. I think to me, it works a little bit more as a comedy. Just because the horror elements, for whatever reason, don't never click for me. And on my rewatch, I was like, I laughed a lot more, really enjoyed it. But I think that the thing there is like, is it ever really scary? And it goes into like a bigger question: how do you define horror films, right?
True.
What has to be there for it to actually be a horror film? And I think for me, just like baseline is, it's got to be scary, or it's got to be like unnerving. Like I would look to a movie like Hereditary or Midsummer, where it's just like kind of like, ugh, you like want to leave the theater. Or even something like torture porn stuff, like I'm thinking Hostel, which I just rewatched. Don't ask why. It's like, is it disgust? Is it scared?
It's like under your skin kind of feeling.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I just don't. For me personally, Cabin in the Woods really didn't do much of that. It didn't make me laugh a ton. I mean, it's an absolutely hilarious movie. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is Whedon. Okay, well, first of all, we got to address the elephant in the room, right?
Yes.
We're talking about Joss.
We have to do this already.
Yeah, sorry, I can't say the dude's name without just like throwing a wrench in the whole mix.
Yeah, this is gonna be tough.
We'll put a pin in that and come back because I do want to answer your question.
Yeah.
When the film came out, he called it, quote, a loving hate letter to the genre, which is a really strange kind of way to describe something that you co-write or something that you create yourself, because I get the contradiction of it all, but as we've seen all the way dating back to Scream, or like you said, Evan, the Evil Dead films, perhaps even earlier, with just like how raucous like the monster movies are of the 50s and 60s. Like there's always been that kind of element of comedy in horror. Like it's relief theory, right? Whether you're letting go of a scream or a laugh, it's like two sides of the same coin. And so to kind of have those two seen as oppositional rather than closely related feels kind of, I feel like I got way less anyways of the horror vibes when I rewatched this movie this week compared to when I watched it Redbox rental 10 years ago, late at night, anticipating a horror movie. But I also knew going in, because of Whedon's pedigree, I was never a huge Buffy guy, or
you weren't a huge Buffy person.
No,
God,
I wasn't.
That really surprises me.
Nor was I really that big into Firefly. But I, for whatever reason, once again, don't ask why, got super into the latest show he did before Cabin in the Woods, Dollhouse on Fox, which also co-starred Fran Kranz. And I had gotten really kind of used to the classic house style of a Whedon kind of kitchen sink style science fiction, which there's definitely that element in here too, right? Where it's like how much of this is, and we're getting into spoiler territory, which I don't know why you would press play on a Cabin in the Woods podcast in 2022 without anticipating that. But the whole conceit, and even down to one of the things that stood out to me the most in my rewatch was like the opening title sequence literally like freeze frames on Richard Jenkins and Bradley Whitford in like a golf cart spilling coffee on themselves, right? So like it's almost like from the get-go, you know that yes, this is going to be a lot of things, just like Whedon projects are a lot of things, but first and foremost, it's going to be a comedic, self-aware, very precocious and smarmy delivery system. And that's ultimately what I got out of it. But I want to hear your side of it, Evan.
So, yeah, I mean, a funny story about that particular scene that you're mentioning. I was reading that apparently they wanted to have kind of this goofy, just completely like almost like disconnected scene in the beginning because they thought it would be funny if someone like walked in and was like, wait a minute, am I in the right movie theater? Based on the opening scene. But I think for me the horror is not really so much about being frightened, but it's about the systems that the movie is showing, like these old world systems of control and this idea that like all of these people need to be killed as part of some experiment, like just twisted experiment designed to torture them and make them suffer before they die. And I think,
now I'm picking it up a little bit more.
I think for me that's the real horror more so than individual like scares or gore. But it's this system that exists, this ancient system that is trapped all of these people and does so, it seems like at least once a year.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of this I mean, what do we make of I mean, obviously spoilers are out the window at this point. Like it's going to happen. If you haven't seen it yet and you want to see it, obviously go see it.
It is streaming on Peacock right now.
What was that? It
is streaming for free on Peacock right now.
Oh yeah, there you go. Perfect. But I think, the entire concept of it was funny. I read one of these reviews and they're basically like, well, the big reveal is essentially they have to sacrifice these people. Is it ever really explained like why it's the horror movie sort of
no
ritual to it, or is there something special where like they have to like be scared when they die?
It's like they have to fulfill the tropes, right? Like it doesn't the sacrifice isn't effective unless the jock character isn't also dumb. Like they're trying to like lower his cognitive abilities, even though he's they're full on academic scholarship, and similar with like the virgin has to be the last one remaining, and it's optional whether or not she lives.
Okay, so they have to fulfill the trope,
right?
Which is fun. That's clever.
Yeah,
right?
That's fun. But I do think that is something that I thought more about this time around. Like you said, Dan, there's the whole question, like. The words horror movie are never said, I believe, in the script, right? Whether in the world of the college kids or the world of the staff on hand, the mysterious organization, whatever. Yeah. So it is a question, I think, of like, what is it about those ancient gods, led or... the giant hand that comes up in the final shot of this giant, whatever it is. I mean, that's part of the fun is the unknown. And that's also, I think, one of the tenets of horror movies, right? Is that that's what makes them effective, is that there is that element of the unknown. But that there is kind of this weird disconnect, which also I think plays into the comedy of it as well, where like, is it about these tropes being fulfilled because they're horror movies, or is it that like are they suggesting or implying that horror movies became so prevalent in our society because those are based on the ancient rituals of these gods that are being kept at bay? I don't know.
You guys
What's
are getting so
Yeah.
much more out of this movie than I got out of it. It's like amazing. You guys read so much better in this movie than I do. Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, here's another tough one. Who's the protagonist in this movie?
I know, I was waiting for you. You're
What, dude? I'm a genre purist. I like
know.
story structure. Because I think, you know, when looking back on this movie, I was thinking about this in the shower this morning, actually. So I watched it like last
Dan's
night.
shower thoughts. Love it.
Shower thoughts, yeah. I was like, you know what? The guys and the sort of the workers, the office space type white collar workers, I'm way more interested in their story than I am the teenagers in the woods.
Yeah.
Now, and we spend a lot of time with them. But it does kind of point towards the, you know, the final girl being the protagonist. She's the last one to make the choice, and she basically, you know, ends the world with her choice. Is she the like? What do you guys think about that? Because it's, I don't know, it's such a minefield. You know, when you talk about self-aware horror, and I love that we're talking about this movie because it is probably the most self-aware horror movie out there. But is it, you know, as one of the reviewers, is it too clever by half? Like, is there a core narrative happening here that you can latch onto, or that you latched onto?
I mean, I think the default answer is Kristen Connolly's character. But I do think the thing I was most excited about when I put this movie back on is my guy Richard Jenkins. Like,
yeah, he's amazing.
Every scene that's who I wanted to be on my screen. But definitely not a main character, much less the protagonist. Whereas go back to Scream, also very much a self-aware horror movie, not to the extent, not in like as much of an like transparent way as Cabin in the Woods. But while that's also an ensemble movie like Cabin in the Woods, it's Sydney's story, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where it's like, you know, I come back to it, and obviously Scream came out at a formative time in my life, you know, discovering and becoming obsessed with horror movies, whereas Cabin in the Woods is a very fun, clever drop in the bucket that came out when I was an adult, you know, not too far out of college. And then I go back to, and maybe you're right, maybe that purist part of you I do empathize with in this instance, Dan, because like I can easily say like Sydney's story mattered and got under my skin just as much as Scream entertains. Whereas Cabin in the Woods, entertaining as hell, clever, but there's nothing there that really sits with me. I'm really fascinated by this idea of systems that you mentioned, Evan. And so I'm wondering, is that more of the part of it that really resonates with you still 10 years later?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually going to answer the question about who I think the protagonist is.
Here we go.
Even just a few minutes ago, I was thinking, you know, it's Dana, Kristen Connolly's character. She's, you know, the final girl. It's, you know, the fate of the world hinges on her. But I'm actually going to say, I think Marty. I think Fran Kranz is the protagonist of this movie.
Yeah, 100%.
He has a direct relationship with the audience.
Yes.
Like whether we want to say he's officially breaking the fourth wall or not, he has a direct link to the audience because he is wise to all of these things in his stoner wisdom. He's aware of the manipulation, even if he doesn't understand how it's happening. And the idea that he is able to figure out that they're like in many scenes, like there's a scene where, you know, Chris Hemsworth is like, we got to stick together, and then they pump the gas, and he's like, we got to split up, and Marty's like, really? Come on, guys. But it's like he finds the camera, he finds the control shaft, he's able to manipulate the elevator. I feel like Marty's the protagonist here.
Yeah, I think that's a really, and he's basically the hero, right? Because he survives the kill that allows the ritual to fail, essentially. Because even if the final girl was still alive, it wouldn't have mattered, right? Because like he was the one who had to die. Am I correct in saying this? Right.
You're right.
That's what screwed everything up. Yeah.
Yeah, right. He's the hero, essentially. But she kind of makes the choice at the end not to kill him. So I think, you know, obviously they're both heroes at the end of the day. But I mean, is it? Did your Evan specifically pointed to you? What has changed in the 10 years that you've seen that has gone by about this movie? Has your opinion changed at all?
I mean, my opinion of Joss Whedon has certainly changed in the last 10 years.
That's what I was kind of, I was
There's our opening
into that. I was tiptoeing into it.
Yeah. It's uncomfortable to think about his association with this movie, especially because, I mean, Drew Goddard did direct it, but he co-wrote it with Whedon, and it does kind of bear his Whedon's stamp in many ways. His like sense of humor, his kind of like, goofy take on the paranormal, and so yeah, it's definitely uncomfortable to think about his association with the movie, just knowing what I know about him now in his personal life and how he treats the people he works with or has worked with, because I don't know who he's working with now. But that definitely has colored my perspective in the movie. But like otherwise though, I think for me it's held up. Like I think maybe it's not as like, I can understand your arguments about it being more comedy than horror, and I think the more I watch it, the more I end up, laughing more than being, scared or really feeling like, oh man, this is truly terrifying. So maybe that's a little bit of my changes. I'm coming more to your side of thinking about it as comedy first more than horror. But I still think it works as both, and I think I'm still leading with horror. But who knows? Maybe if I watch it a few more times, I'll come to see the light.
Yeah, what do we do with the Josh? I mean, it's like, it's weird for me because I saw it after the initial Joss Whedon stuff started to come out.
Yeah.
So I think obviously that colored my viewpoint of the movie that I was seeing. But I mean, I was also a massive Buffy fan. It was like my favorite thing in high school. So I think for me, it's like, I think seeing this movie, it has the Whedon voice. It has that kind of, how can I put this? Aggro nerd? Am I allowed to say? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, there's just like this very self-righteous, almost pompous. I was looking for words for this the other day. I was like, I don't really know what this is. But it sounds like he's in some way saying, hey, I'm kind of smarter than everybody else. I'm gonna punch or poke holes into all this entire genre and how people view these movies and that sort of stuff, and you're gonna laugh with me because I'm funny, and that it's mostly true. But there's a weird, I've always felt this, and it's one of the reasons I avoided this there's like a really kind of cynical undercurrent to it, and like I think the ending specifically is sort of I don't know, would you call the ending cynical or nihilistic?
Yeah,
I don't really know how would you guys define the ending, because it's so specific, because it's a downer ending, it's not a happy ending at all. And I just sort of connected that all together in my head and be like, God, I don't know. It's certainly a fun movie and I laugh a lot, and it really does hit a home run in terms of skewering a lot of the horror genre. But there's a little unsettledness to the whole thing that I notice every time I watch it. I don't know. Am I off base on saying that, or you guys get any tinge of that at all?
I mean, you said yes right away, Evan. So I'm curious why you gravitate that so quickly. I think I do too, but I need a little convincing.
Sure. So I mean, like, when faced with the choice of sacrificing yourself and ending the entire world, you choose saving yourself. I mean, I feel like that's kind of a fuck it all ending. It's just like, who cares? Like, maybe the world needs to burn, but it's like, it's more than the world burning. Like, the world is going to straight up end, and hell will literally be wrought upon earth. And I feel like it doesn't get more nihilist than that.
Yeah. I mean,
it's got something.
It brings up for me the debate my wife and I always have about environmentalism. not to bring this to a completely
Here
different
we go.
side.
This is Joe Rogan. You're gonna start
Yeah.
arguing about climate. And how
See,
it's not
climate is everything. But what is that? It does, and maybe that's where my tendency to like push back against. Maybe I'm not pushing back against the interpretation, but just pushing it back against that in general. Because like both in my rewatch this week and 10 years ago, I think that ending happened. And I was just like, huh, yep, makes sense. But like actually analyzing it, it's like, yeah, that's what does that say about the worldview here? I mean, is there some like is that like Joss's own ugliness kind of coming through?
Oh, and that's what I read it as.
Yeah, I'd be curious to kind of be a fly on the wall of the room where him and Drew hash out the ending. And was that always just like a foregone conclusion of how they just really wanted to just literally blow everything up at the end?
Well, yeah. I don't. To me, that's where I'm drawing like the parallel between the smarminess and the pompousness and the sort of self-righteousness. To me, it's like a direct line.
Dan, I wanted to ask you something since you're saying you're such a big you watched Buffy so much.
Yeah,
I didn't see Buffy when I was younger, and I started watching it in the last couple of years, and I forget where I left off, somewhere in the middle. But one of the characters who I just straight up can't stand is Xander, and I've heard that a lot of Xander, it comes from Joss Whedon, the smarminess, the like bad jokes, the like just bad attitude, the shitty way he treats Buffy. And I'm just curious, like, if you found that in rewatch, or if you feel like, because I feel like we're talking about Joss Whedon now and his kind of imprint on things. So I want to know more about what you think about that, and possibly if you saw that in other areas here in the film aside from the ending.
Yeah, I mean, there is when I'm who did is it New York Mag or Vulture that did the recent piece on him?
Yeah, I think it was New York Mag. Yeah,
and they mentioned the Xander thing and a little bit, and I don't know, I had never really thought about that much, and then going back and thinking about it, and I was like, that it's literally a direct mirror of him. Like, there's no fictional sort of disconnect. Like, it's literally like him inserting himself inside Buffy, in sort of that universe and that perspective. And I think that's, to me, it's like kind of made it a little bit, it made this movie a little bit uncomfortable, just because if you look back at the sort of the creator's eye view here, and you think about it from that level of like writing this movie, I think they said they wrote it in 3 days or something. And, going through all the special effects, it's a $30 million movie. This is not a small film. And like, that is what, with those resources, you come out with this at the end. It does kind of rub me the wrong way in the sense that like, I feel a little bit like this is kind of who I was, or this is how I talked about things, or this is how I viewed culture and other people. And, you move on from that eventually. Hopefully you do, as you grow and mature and have different experiences. And I don't, Whedon didn't seem like, when I'm seeing this movie, I don't see a lot of that maturity there at all. There's still that sort of 16, 17-year-old, hey, I'm better than everybody else. And like, let me kind of skewer and make fun of everything else without really doing anything on their own. And now that's unfair, completely unfair. But I think within this movie, that vibe is there, if that makes sense. There's sort of this very standoffish feeling to it, which I don't know. And I was arguing with my roommate about this. And I was like, and I actually have argued on Reddit about this many times, this movie.
Oh boy.
You gone to the mat, huh?
And the thing that I was there, to me, now this is very much my personal opinion, and I don't know if I can back it up at all, but there's almost like a slight disrespect towards the genre. Do you guys pick up on that at all?
Well, that's where it kind of began, right? Was the Whedon's quote about it being a loving hate letter. Like, at what point does the contradiction just not equate, right? the other thing that this is making me think of is the whole kind of argument that's, been tossed around with postmodernism in general, but especially with regards to the horror genre, I feel, in terms of like how depictions of women are treated in this kind of self-aware, almost like it's a vacuum, right? Like the argument that, as if it's parody or if it's self-aware, then it can't be misogynist. Same thing with like racist jokes, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there's some of that definitely happening in here. Like there's some gratuitous butt shots, and I mean,
of course, yeah.
And it's done in service of the ancient gods, and there's also that wink wink nudge nudge with voyeurism and the people in the lab watching what's happening while also like trying to orchestrate it, and it's cunning, but it still reads, I think, especially post Whedongate, as discomforting. So going back to your original definition of horror, Dan, like that idea of something getting under your skin, like I didn't really get that because I was still so kind of enamored with the jokes of it all. But like thinking back, I'm like, man, if I were to ever rewatch this, that's gonna absolutely be in my head because we've had this conversation first. And that feels gross to me now. So fuck.
But yeah, I mean, unintentional horror, so to speak.
Yeah, the horror of the human male mind, even at its most clever. Yeah.
Evan, I want to hear your take on my ridiculous notion that this is disrespectful to the genre. I know it's an absurd take, but I want to hear reaction.
I mean, I was really responding to what Chris was saying a moment ago about the misogyny of it. Because you had asked me before, Dan had my opinion changed. And that is another area where I feel like this movie hit differently on this viewing. Yeah. The parts that, are supposed to be that the wink wink piece, as Chris was saying, they just, it didn't go down the same way. It really felt uncomfortable on this viewing. Even if it was supposed to be like, oh, we gotta play into genre tropes here, it just felt gross. It was one part of the movie that I was kind of like not really paying as much attention during the like, oh, let's wait for her to take her top off scene. I was just kind of like, eh.
Yeah.
But getting back to what you'd asked me about your take on this as being disrespectful, and I think this movie is a weird double-edged sword that could cut both ways. Like, I think for me, it feels like homage, like it feels like love to the genre, but you could just as easily turn around and say this is somebody flipping the bird at the genre, and they made a house that's basically the cabin from Evil Dead, and they threw a bunch of shit in the basement and a bunch of monsters up in a kitchen sink format to say, look, we've done it all, there's nothing new to do, fuck you guys. Like, I'm just gonna make a movie that's like making fun of all that.
Yeah, I think you really can see it either way. And that might be one of the actual attractions or sort of great things about the movie, is it does kind of play both ways.
Right. And I don't mean to say it as a cop-out, because like, but you're saying it, and I feel like I'm also thinking about it this way now. So I'm kind of like, I'm not completely on your side, but I'm also feeling like you're making some good points here.
That's the first point I've ever said that this podcast.
It's probably true, myself included.
Should we switch to our chaser?
Yes.
Our chaser film. So this is a little bit new. Obviously, we're doing the main film here, and we're going to close it out with a different film, sort of tangentially related here. We're going to do 2007 comedy horror or horror comedy film Teeth. Now, what's the story? Did you guys see this already? Are you guys coming into this cold, or you guys saw this back in 2007?
I saw it back in 2007. Once again, I feel like Lionsgate and I are Redbox soulmates, and that's almost certainly how I came across it. Yeah. What about you, Evan? Is this new for you?
Yeah, this was the first time I had seen this.
Cool. Oh man, wow! I want to hear your reaction then.
Yes.
Oh man. This movie is bonkers, but like in a really entertaining way. I mean, the title alone, teeth. You're like, okay, vagina dentata. Like I know,
Yeah.
I kind of know what I'm in for, but at the same time, just seeing it all play out is it's just so insane.
Yeah.
It's
totally, it is a crazy film, and it's a lot crazier than I remember it. When I first saw this, I was just like, oh, this is so cool. I think I heard it through like Sundance Buzz. And I was like, I gotta see this movie. I don't know if I saw it. I doubt I saw it in theaters. I'd be probably a little bit too embarrassed to see it in theaters. And I think and it hit me as like, oh wow, this is really, it's really low budget but really good. It's like indie in the right ways, and it had a very strong message, I thought. And on rewatch, I love it even more. Like, I don't even, to me, this aged incredibly well, which is so bonkers to me. Chris, did you feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely still think it's a really good, I don't know if I would call it great. I think there is definitely some amateurishness to it. It's the debut of the director, Mitchell Lichtenstein, and he hasn't done much in the 15 years since. He had a really poorly reviewed Parker Posey movie in 2009 called Happy Tears, and very middling reviewed movie Angelica in 2015, which was also more of a straight horror thriller. But so there's some, I guess I take it off for some style points, but in terms of like the core of it, like it's just it's both insane that it exists and insane that it took so long for it to get made, considering like the lasting mythology behind the premise, right?
Yeah.
I think it's for me, the things that worked best on the rewatch were the set pieces. I think that if you want to see how horror and comedy really do line up, look at nearly every kill scene, which is not, or not kill scene, but attack scene, whatever you want to call it, bite scene. And the way that it's just orchestrated from the perspective of that whole like trope of with horror movies, you know exactly what's going to happen, and yet it still keeps you on pins and needles. Like, just it's emotionally and it both in a kind of off-putting pleasurable way, but also in just like a squeamish gross out way, and that's pretty impressive that they're able to do that not once, not twice, but at least 3 really big times throughout the movie.
Yeah, I feel like this movie's a little bit lost. Am I wrong in saying that?
In terms of like its reputation over the years?
Cachet, like, yeah, like I don't feel like I hear anybody, especially younger people, talk about this movie. I don't know. Do you guys have any insight into that?
I mean, curious, Evan, why do you think it took you so long to come around to seeing Teeth? Do you recall it coming out back in 07, 08 with, I guess, the more wide release?
I don't remember it coming out. I do remember hearing people talk about it over the years, and it sounding like a really entertaining movie. And for some reason, it just fell through the cracks. Like, I just didn't end up seeing it. And so, actually, I remember when you guys were emailing, asking, about movies that we were interested in, and this came up. I was like, wow, perfect excuse to see this movie. I've been wanting to see it. So I kind of jumped at the chance to finally see it. But yeah, it definitely flew under my radar when it came out, and I guess it just hadn't risen to the top of my lists in the years since.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like it's a very kind of bizarre film that stands, I think, outside the discourse of horror. It doesn't really seem like it was part of any sort of movement that was happening at the time. At least I don't think so. And then you have the director who didn't really have a follow-up. And then you have the star who, Jess Weixler. Has she done, I don't feel like she went to Juilliard. She's friends with, what's her name? Zero Dark 30 girl, Jessica Chastain.
Right.
But she never really broke out.
No.
Despite an amazing performance, I think, here. A really fantastic performance.
And she got recognition for it at Sundance, along with the film itself. Lichtenstein assumed, just like I think a lot of people probably did, that it would go more of the midnight route, like most horror movies do at Sundance. But it got main dramatic recognition, and so did Jess Weixler. But yeah, after that, she basically just did, the smallest indie films you can imagine for several years, steadily
Yeah,
employed.
she works. Yeah.
And she was in a couple Jessica Chastain movies recently, both Ava, which bombed, and Eyes of Tammy Faye, which had some buzz, but I think is lost by now. But she did play one of the grown-up kids in It Chapter 2, which is a pretty big get, especially considering the box office success of those movies. And a recurring role on The Good Wife, 19 episodes.
Yeah,
so
that's how I knew her. I'd seen her in The Good Wife.
She's definitely not struggling, but yeah, she's not a star.
Yeah. And so the big question here is this is a horror comedy, but for some reason it feels quite different than Cabin in the Woods. One, it's not necessarily as quote sort of wink wink. It's not. I think it's clever, but it's not really going for the self-aware every 10 seconds vibe, which Cabin in the Woods definitely hits. And so for me, it's a little bit more of a traditional narrative, obviously. I don't know, how would you guys relate the two? Where do you think that there's some overlap here?
The only thing that comes to mind right off the bat, other than, they're both Lionsgate, and I think there is a vibe to Lionsgate both before and after the MGM debacle. I think essentially the Saw franchise is what brought this studio to life after just being middling for several years. And so it's got that kind of, both films have that kind of grimy undercurrent where it's it's very clearly counterculture, and it doesn't care too much about being capital A art. And yet they are still trying to say something. They have some running commentary, whether it's commentary on a genre of art like Cabin in the Woods, or commentary on deeply rooted misogyny and abstinence culture. I found it very telling as a public school teacher to rewatch this since I've become a teacher, and seeing the same exact, decades old stand from school boards on censoring happening here and now in the current events of our times all over again. So I think that it's still, I would say that, even if it's 5 years older than Cabin in the Woods and they both have things to say, I feel like Teeth has more to say, and it's more prevalent than ever.
What do you think? What do you think is there the crossover here? Do you what do you think?
Well, I was gonna say to Chris, it has teeth.
Yes.
But yeah, I agree. It in terms of lasting social commentary, it does speak to a more pervasive issue of misogyny, violence against women, and sexual violence. It's I think it definitely has staying power in that way, and addressing a real social issue versus commenting on a genre. I think for me, the common grounds between the two movies lies in their kind of wicked sense of humor. I think to the scenes where after the attacks, we've got Josh Pace, who's lost his fingers to he's a gross gynecologist who stuck his fingers in her and then got them chopped off, and they have him on the operating room table and being like, "Are you sure you don't want to tell us how this happened?" And he just grabs the anesthesia thing and sticks it on his face, and I feel like it's those kind of moments. And later on, when they're putting the kid's part of his dick back on, and they're like, there's nothing right home about here. He's barely, who cares? You don't even really
not even worth it.
Yeah. That's the common ground I see between these two movies, is having a wicked, morbid sense of humor.
Kind of that very dark, pitch black sense of humor. The one thing that I was as you guys are talking, it sort of just popped into my head. It's Teeth is a genre film, right? Like, this is a schlocky genre
Mhm.
film that has a pretty, straightforward, simple story, but is able to say a lot with that, sort of those within those genre rules. Whereas Cabin in the Woods, is Cabin in the Woods attacking films like this?
You son of a
I'm putting these
bitch.
softballs out there, guys.
You're blowing it up just like Fran Kranz at the end of Cabin in the Woods.
Hey, come on, this isn't Reddit. You know?
Oh my god. It just popped into my head. I don't know if I agree with that statement or not. I was just saying, like, because I mean, Cabin in the Woods is doing what? It's just attacking sort of genres left and right. Boom, 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 boom. It's a lot of attacking. But here we have Teeth, which is, a $2 million film.
Mhm.
Pretty schlocky. Definitely seems low budget when you're watching. It's like, oh yeah, this is kind of all over the place. But it really,
Right.
to me, hits a home run.
Mm-hmm. I think that you have, when it comes down to it, Cabin in the Woods was on the shelf for 2 years, but I feel like it easily could have been on the shelf for 10 or 15 years, because what Teeth is doing in 2007 seems to be almost like something that Whedon and Goddard are ignoring, a few years later, whenever they're writing the script, shortly after, I guess, the official release of Teeth in the late 2000s. There seems to be this suggestion in Cabin in the Woods, inherent in the setup, the dialogue, and arguably the conclusion too, where like this is a genre of film that is unsavable, but like there have been people like surpassing all the expectations of the genre, going all the way back to Scream, and even arguably earlier than that. Like, it seems strange now thinking about it that like the Evil Dead cabin is there, but then like Sam Raimi's built one of the most successful careers in Hollywood on that kind of self-aware brand.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, do we think that makes me think of another question? This made less controversial.
This is your last question, Dan. I'm cutting you off.
How would Cabin in the Woods be? Can you make Cabin in the Woods today? And would it be successful? And think about this in terms of, I think we're all fans of, we hate the term elevated horror. I know we're all fans of it here. How would it work? Could you do like a Cabin in the Woods that sort of goes after Ari Aster's style?
I don't know. That's very specific. But I'm really not sure if it would work, because although Chris, I feel like you were hitting on something earlier about this idea that it seems like every couple years somebody tackles the genre in a new way that people it leaves them kind of like scratching their head like, I hadn't thought about horror like that. And that's why I think it's so enduring, is that, there are movements in horror, and there are people who are disruptors, and they come along and disrupt movements and start their own movements. And Teeth is weird. I agree with you that Dan, it doesn't feel like it's part of a movement. It kind of exists in its own world. But if I had to draw a parallel between that and another movie, I would say Jennifer's Body, because it's came out around the same time. It's kind of got a similar commentary on like violence against women and misogyny, and it's not quite as jokey as Jennifer's Body, like, because I feel like Diablo Cody kind of has her own kind of style, but I definitely see at least a little similarity there in what they're trying to do. But that was not the question you asked. It was more about whether Cabin in the Woods would work today, which honestly I don't think it would, because I feel like horror has moved on to do different things since then.
Yeah.
True. I'll leave you guys with this though. I did want to make note of it, and I almost forgot to until now. Just started a new semester of film studies at school. Teenagers, 2022. I always have them fill the whiteboard with as many of their favorite movies as they can think of. And guess what showed up there? Cabin in the Woods.
Oh, God.
Cabin in the Woods, 2022. A 16-year-old in today's world, comes across that movie and still finds something wonderful in it, which is impressive. Though I do still ultimately agree, Evan, that I think we've gone past that at this point. But it's very much a teenage movie. Like,
yeah, and maybe it's like sort of spark notes for the horror genre.
Yeah, and it's also just got like that. I mean, we're also obsessed with like how clever we can be in high school. So I think that's maybe another parallel. Like, it's Teeth is amateurish, but it's made by a 50-year-old guy.
Yes, and written by him. Yeah,
right. And whereas Cabin in the Woods very much feels like kind of Arrested Development mode, though incredibly witty still.
Love it. Arrested Development. Any closing thoughts besides that? Evan, what's your closing thought on Cabin in the Woods and Teeth? What do you got for us?
Oh, so much pressure.
No pressure. This is no pressure zone.
No, I'm kidding. I'm glad I watched Teeth. I really think there is something there. I think there is an enduring commentary that is still relevant today. I think it's got a lot of great ideas. I don't know if I would agree with you that it hits a home run. I think it's more like a triple for me. I think a lot of great ideas, not all of them executed well. And I'm just really think it's a bizarre twist that she has to fuck her stepbrother to death.
Oh, that part does not hold up well at all. In fact, his character is nearly unwatchable.
Yes.
Like, just that was the guy from Nip Tuck, right? Oh,
right.
Awful.
Yeah, what a fumble.
But I look past that. I look past it.
Still definitely worth a watch. It's streaming on Tubi. That's how I watched it, because I could not find my DVD. So
I love that you have a DVD.
I do. Cabin in the Woods on Peacock, Teeth from 2007 on Tubi. Thank you so much, Evan, for joining us on this episode of Film Trace.